We're in Judges 19. Judges 19. We'll do 19, 20, and 21. Today we'll finish up the Judges. Let's pray together. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful for this first day of the week, for the rain that we had yesterday and the beautiful sunshine that's warming the day up today already. We're most especially thankful, Holy Father, for this day as it relates to our relationship with you. We're so thankful for the opportunity to worship, to study, to show our thanksgiving for all that you've done for us, you, your Son, and the Spirit. Help us during this time while we study from the Old Testament to understand the things that were taught long ago, the things that happened long ago, but to see, Holy Father, how these are timeless and how they still help us in our lives today. In Jesus' name, amen. A couple of things as we begin. You'll see in chapter 19 and verse 1 that you have this statement again, and it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel. In talking with Brother Jim a couple of weeks ago, he noted or pointed out to me that maybe in his version, or he just thought about that, because there was no king. So we begin to think about the things that we've read over the last couple of weeks and the things that are going on, that these things might have happened because there was no king. And that's possible, that's for sure. But we realize that they actually had a king. I mean, they don't have the king like other countries had yet, but they had a king. And there was a certain way they should have behaved and certain things they shouldn't have done. And but that was not the case. So one thing to consider there is that statement. Also, to think about if we studied this book again, if I taught this book of Judges again, I think I'd take these last few chapters and I'd move them back. And I'd find some place and we just study them earlier because we've tried to emphasize, and we'll see again today, somebody's name who's going to pop up and you're going, well, that has to mean that these things are happening a lot earlier because he would be just too old to be alive at the end of the book of Judges. So again, let's consider that. And also, I misspoke a couple of weeks ago, and I'm so thankful that Sister Hammonds pointed that out. When it comes to the judges, Samson will be the last judge in the book of Judges that we study, but there are going to be two more judges that we will actually study, but we won't study them till we get to 1 Samuel. So you'll have to start thinking about who those might be. So that's what I should have said, not that Samson was the last judge, period. He's just the last judge in the book of Judges. In chapter 19 and verse 1, it came to pass in those days that there was no king in Israel, and there was a certain Levite sojourning on the farther side of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. And his concubine played the harlot against him, and she went away to her father's house, and she's there now for 4 months. And after 4 months, her husband arose. He went after her. Now we begin to kind of take note of his character. There are inconsistencies in his character. As we see here, he goes to her after 4 months and he speaks kindly unto her, or he speaks to her heart. In essence, he's making an effort to do what? To repair their relationship. She's a concubine. This isn't the first time you'd see this term. You can go back to some of the patriarchs, and they too had wives and they had concubines. So there was a relationship there. But as far as her position and the rights that maybe a wife had, maybe it was less for a woman like this. Anyway, he's making an effort. He speaks kindly to her. His father-in-law, he's happy to see him. In fact, the end of verse 3 says he rejoiced to meet him. And so he, again, retains him, his father-in-law does, and he stays there for 3 days. And at the end of the third day, as the fourth day begins, he's basically ready to get on with his journey. Now, he has brought with him a servant, and he also has 2 donkeys with him. And also, we'll see later on that he's come and he's providing a lot of stuff as well. Yes?
I think it's interesting that the Septuagint and the Old Latin use that she was angry with him, not unfaithful. I don't know if it's just a difference in how things were written or not, but might explain a little bit of why he comes to speak kindly with her, that maybe it was just a big fight, basically.
Okay, so maybe the possibility that based upon how that was translated, a different rendering, I think, again, the way the American Standard renders it, something happened in their relationship. She left him. And for 4 months, they don't see each other, and then he makes an effort to take her back.
You know, also in terms of the fact, is he really going to get her and kind to her? Or is that kindness kind of a lie?
Yeah, not sure. There's inconsistencies in this Levite's character. That's all I don't know what his motivation was at the end of 4 months. All I know is the Bible tells us that he shows up at his father-in-law's house, speaks kindly to her, speaks to her heart. She obviously decides to go with him, as we'll see. 4 days have passed. They've been hanging out. They've been getting to know one another. They've been eating, celebrating to some extent. And finally, the man rose up on the 5th day. The father-in-law in verse 7 tries to persuade him to stay a little bit longer. He does stay for a little while, but he decides there on the 5th day, even though, again, a lot of time has passed, it's late in the day, he's going to leave. Verse 10, the man would not tarry that night. He rose up and departed, and he came over against Jebus. And the same as what? Jerusalem, all right? And there were with him, again, as we noted, a couple of donkeys, his concubine, and it doesn't state here, but we also know that he has a servant with him. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to him, Master, come, I pray thee, and let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and lodge there. And his master's response is, no, and what's the reason? So these aren't our people. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute, that's Jerusalem. But yet, who's going to conquer this city? I'll be with you in a second. Who's going to conquer this city? Or unless you're answering that question. Did you have a point? No, I'm sorry. I thought I saw your hand. Who's going to conquer this city? It's going to be a king. It's going to be called by his name. City of David. Yeah, we'll look ahead. Just if you want to just kind of make a note, 2 Samuel chapter 5. David, king of Israel, he's gonna conquer Jerusalem, which was known as Jebus. It was also known as, starts with a Z, Zion. And the reason that's the case is because there's the main hill is actually going to be called Zion. You'll see that as we go along. So here, though, the city hasn't been conquered. It's inhabited by these Jebusites. And according to this Levite, the reason that he gives his servant on why we're not going to stay here is because we're not going to turn aside, verse 12, into the city of a foreigner, someone who is not of the children of Israel. But we're going to pass over to Gibeah. And the reason we're going to do that is because Gibeah is a city that belongs to the children of Benjamin. So he feels more comfortable in that, going and staying in a city of his own people, or at least of the original tribes, descendants of Israel, as opposed to staying with these foreigners or these Jebusites. Again, they're going to pass on their way, and the sun is going down in verse 14. And so they turned aside in verse 15, and they lodged in Gibeah. And he went in, and they sat down in the street of the city. And again, they're there for some time. Maybe that was how things worked back then. That's where you went. And then maybe someone who was kind and hospitable would see those who were, again, around the city square, so to speak, and maybe then say, hey, where are you staying? And at this point in time, no man took them into his house to lodge. And so that's unfortunate, because again, those people who lived in that particular city, when they looked at this man and they looked at his servant, and they looked at his concubine, these were three people. And what they should have done is they should have shown hospitality, because that's what the Lord would have them to do. But remember, everybody right now is doing that which is right in their own eyes. That's right. And the Hebrew writer even reminds us Forget not to show love unto strangers, for thereby some have entertained unawares. How did they know that these three hadn't been sent for another purpose? We do not know. So, no one offers hospitality, but there comes an old man, verse 16, and he's coming in from his work. I kind of like that. So see, it's okay that as we get older, we're still able to work. Maybe we're glad we're not working out in the field. That he might have probably been able to outwork us all, but maybe not. He's coming in from the field, and what do they have in common with this guy? He's a fellow Ephraimite, but he's sojourning in Gibeah. And in verse 17, he lifts up his eyes. He saw this man in the street, and the old man said, "Where are you going? And where are you coming from?" So he begins to tell him, "Well, we're passing from Bethlehem, Judah, into the farther side of the hill country of Ephraim. And I'm going to the house of Jehovah." Now, you could read that, and you may think, well, that means he's going, where might you be inclined to think he's headed? Yeah, we may, but what city we might almost answer too quickly and think, oh, he's headed to Jerusalem, and yet that's not where it is. We've just read that Jerusalem isn't even part of there. It's someplace else. We know where. If you read a little bit further, we won't give it away yet. And he says, "And there is no man that taketh me into his house." So that's the honest answer. Nobody has showed hospitality to us. You can imagine how that was. People passing them on the street, looking at them. I'm not sure what they saw in them or what they didn't see in them, but nobody was kind to them. Again, he has enough straw. He has provisions for his animals and for himself and those that are with him. There is no want of anything. And look at the old man and look at, again, if we're looking at his character, which there still will be some inconsistencies that we're getting ready to get to. Maybe there's a better word for that. Things that make us scratch our head, something that just doesn't seem quite right. But here, even though the Levite has said, "Hey, I have plenty," the old man says, "Peace be unto thee." Whatever your needs are, what's he say? I'll take care of them. Now that's the way it ought to be. So he shows kindness to him and favor. Just don't lodge in the street. Maybe he knew already that wouldn't be a place for them to stay during the nighttime. Seemingly, based upon what's getting ready to happen, he probably had a pretty good idea regarding the mentality, the sinfulness, ungodliness of this particular city. So he brings them in. He gives them provisions. He washes their feet. And so they are together in verse 22, making their hearts merry. So they're just enjoying their time together. And during this time, the men of the city, certain base fellows, beset the house round about, verse 22, beating at the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man. They said, "Bring forth the man that came into the house, that we may know him." So you see what their intent is. And when you read that,
Talking about that, I can't remember what chapter it is, but it's talking about the destruction of Sodom.
so that would be as you were reading that, it probably conjured up that thought of, that sounds really familiar. And that took you back to Genesis chapter 19, right? Yes, sir.
Regarding that topic there, this scene that's being given here it does seem to be supposed to remind us of that destruction. But what we're seeing here is not only there's no one in the city that was looking to take care of them as soon as they came in, because they had to search for someone. But you also have there's the three of them that are strangers that come in. They're taken into someone's house after they look. And then all of this happens. There's a lot that's being shown here to say that Israel has gotten worse than even Sodom and Gomorrah were. Not only is it that the majority of this city are wicked like this, but there's no one righteous enough that will look for strangers to take them in and take care of them.
That's very possible. Again, I do note that when you look at back in Sodom and Gomorrah, in chapter 19 and verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the city round, both young and old. That's a distinction. Here it just says there's base fellows. We're going to read on to where when Israel's going to come up against the Benjamites and Gibeah, they're going to ask for those guilty, which seems to suggest there are some that are not, but that's very possible. There's no doubt, to your point, based upon what we read in chapter 19 and verse 1, we'll read it at the end of chapter 21. Every man is doing that which is right in their own sight. There's no, for the most part, godly people. The majority of these people are ungodly. But let's not forget, we're getting ready to read about a woman in the next book who lived when the judges judged. Not sure when, but sometime during this time that we're talking about, she did, and she was godly. So we can't write the entire nation off because there's going to be good people there. We can't write the entire nation off because we've had one judge, Deborah. We had another one named Barak. We had two more that were named in the book of Judges, Jephthah. He was strong. Samson. So we've had some people mentioned over here that are considered to have faith. But the most part, you got ungodliness going on. That's for sure. So that's what they want. And we're reminded of what happened in Genesis chapter 19. And so now, again, as we begin to consider the interaction, the things that are getting ready to unfold, it's just hard to fathom. That's all I can say. You can't read this and go, oh, well, sounds like he had a good reason to do that. But you can't read Genesis 19 regarding what Lot offered without thinking of the same thing that this man offers and how this unfolds. Again, all I can go back to, connecting that with what Alex just said, is you have to just look at the overall moral degradation of the people. And even to a certain extent, their mindset toward women, which again, there's just nothing positive we can say about that. God never intended for it to be like this. So the master of the house went out and he said, no, my brethren, don't do this wickedness. Why? Because this man is coming to my house. Don't be foolish. Now he says, here is my daughter, a virgin, and his concubine. I'll bring them out. Humble ye them. Don't forget, it's exactly the same words as Lot. And Peter says regarding that Lot, something about his righteous soul. Delivered up righteous Lot, sore distressed by the lascivious life of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their lawless deeds. That's a high commendation for Lot. But in the moment when those men came knocking on Lot's door, and he had how many staying with him? 2, and they weren't men. They look like men, the 2 angels, and you can read about them because those 2 angels had been traveling with the second person in the Godhead in chapter 18. But here it says, hey, I'll bring out my daughter, I'll bring out his concubine. In essence, you do whatever seems good to them. But the men would not listen. So the man, now who's that? That's the Levite. That's the Levite. So again, it goes back to what Brother Randall said. Well, what was his motivation to go get her? Why did he speak kindly to her heart? Well, I could say, well, he did that because maybe he loved her. Maybe so. Or maybe he had other motivations. I don't know. I don't know that. But in the moment here, once that demand was made, and then the fellow Ephraimite, the old man, says, no, don't do that foolishness. Then he almost violently, is the language there, lays hold of his concubine and brought her to them. And we know how that went. abused to the point where the very next morning, as the sun is coming up, the last of her energy she uses to do what? To get back to the doorstep. And that's where she collapses. Now, you've probably read this before, like I have. And then as you begin to think about the next morning when the Lord or the master or the Levite rose up and opens up the door, and she's laying at the doorstep, and his first words seemingly are unkind. Are they not? It is. Up? Get up? I mean, does he not have some inclination as far as what has probably happened the night before? And when he said up, what kind of response did he get? He didn't get one. And so he puts her on one of his 2 donkeys. And the next thing you have him doing is what in regards to her? Cutting her up into 12 pieces. Now, again, if I wasn't a careful reader, I'm not saying I am, if I hadn't read it as many times as I had or looked at it, there's been times in the past when he went to go cutting her up, I thought, wow. Alive? No. Because you have chapter 20 and you have verse 4, and before he's asked as far as what happens, it says the Levite, the husband of the woman that was, American Standard uses the word murdered. She's dead. She's dead.
This goes back to your disrespect of women and the fact that they would offer the women, and that was okay to the master, but not to offer the men. I'm having a hard time.
Yeah. I'm sure, without living back during that culture, but just from the readings that we've had, obviously the position of the woman as it related to the man was different. At the same time, we can go back to the beginning and look at the creation of Adam and Eve. You can look at the relationship they had and where she was taken from and how God intended for it to be. And at this point in time, men and women are not behaving as God would have them behave. They're doing things that's right in their own eyes. And so again, things are so much worse off than they should be. Yes, Brother Harold. Yes, it does. Brother Harold notes that, again, it just shows the extent, the importance that they placed upon hospitality and how far they would go to protect their guest, most especially, seemingly their male guest, even to the point of offering up their daughters. We would, in our own minds, we begin to think about that and think about that with our children or our grandchildren in a similar situation, which, you have to put yourself in that situation. And you're just basically saying, ain't no way, I'm fighting to death here. I'm coming out with both barrels ready to go. Whatever it is, you're not getting anybody in here, right? Now, they may if they're stronger than me and they got more of them, but I'm not just basically going to say, oh, hang on just a second, I got a better plan. Let me go get, not a chance. Yes, sir.
I think that possibly there's some degrees of sin that they're looking at in here as well, that they consider that they want the man, and men lying with men being an abomination of nature. They think that to be a more heinous crime than raping a woman. And so there may be that idea, well, let's go to a lesser sin. So certainly not the only aspect, but that may be part of that reason as well.
He makes a great point. You hear what he said as far as where they basically look at, that levels of sin where basically it'd be a greater sin for them to, in essence, rape this man as opposed to rape this woman. And I'm going to now use that to remind you regarding what happens when people give themselves over to sin. There is a loss of the ability to reason. It creates I've used a word before, an insanity. You're reading this and you're going, what? Because you're saying that's not sane. And yet, we've read about an event here in the chapter 19. There's no doubt that happened around the world probably multiple times yesterday. Would you argue with that?
It reminds me of what you read in the news about the child brides. You know, the little girls are given to older men in other countries.
That's correct.
You know, it's a terrible thing for that child.
Yeah.
It's raping the child.
There's an insanity connected to sin. You know, see people living in sin, doing things, saying things, and when you look at that behavior, you're going to go, how? It's insanity. They've lost the ability to reason and regard sin for what it is. Well, he did this, divided her up. Of course, the reaction of Israel is, man, we've never seen anything like this. Verse 30. They all get together. Chapter 20. 400,000 footmen that drew swords. So you got a collective army. They want to know what happened. Again, what is said in verse 4 is not coming from the mouth of the Levite. It's the Holy Spirit saying, the husband of the woman that was murdered. He answered. He said, well, I came to Gibeah, me and my concubine, and the men of Gibeah rose up against me. They're around the house. And now you have him say, and they they were going to kill me, and my concubine they forced, and she is dead. So now either he doesn't want to tell them what they really wanted to do to him, or that's what he felt like they would in the end do to him. I can't tell you that. So I took my concubine, I cut her in pieces, and I sent her throughout the country. Why? For they have committed a lewdness and folly in Israel. Now what do you say? Verse 7. And so again, you have them all get together, and the decision is made as, well, we're going to go up and settle this with the Benjamites. That's what we're going to do. So verse 12, the tribes of Israel sent men through the tribe of Benjamin. But the first thing they do is they give Benjamin the opportunity to do what? That I've already alluded to. Turn over the guilty party.
He's just said just enough truth to get them all excited. It's something that I think that as he talks, he doesn't tell them everything. He doesn't tell them that he gave his concubine to them.
Very possible. Again, I do not know the heart of this man. When he went after 4 months and spoke kindly to her, stayed with her father-in-law, and then now is going to go to a place of, remember, where's he headed? He tells this guy, I'm going from Bethlehem, Judah, and I'm heading to the house of Jehovah. That's where he was going when he got her. So now let's just say for a moment, put the most positive spin on it, that he went to her for all the right reasons, to reconcile. And now he's going to take her, his servant, and he's got his provisions, and he's going to the house of Jehovah. Why is he going there? I don't know, but sounds like there's some sort of worship, some sort of something he believes he owes God. And on that journey, this unfolds. So when they ask him what happened, if all that's true, then I'm not sure he's trying to put a spin on things. If when he went to get her, there was something not quite right there, then yes, I agree. I just don't know. I just know that that's what he said. It didn't matter how he put it. It didn't matter how he put it. They had a reason to be up in arms about it once they found out. Yes, Brother Doug.
Saying everything, but there's an element of revenge here because she was unfaithful to him. Is she was willing to grab her and put her out. Come out of it. They had to enter, I think.
Maybe so, Brother. Maybe you may have another point, Brother Doug. I just don't know. We're not given enough regarding him to know, but that's a valid. It wouldn't be the right reason to do what he did, but it could be an explanation, as you say. So they're all getting together. They say, hand over the guilty party, and the Benjamites say, No. And you're going, well, why not? Don't they understand? They've already, back up in verse 3 or whatever, they know that Israel is gathering against them. Somebody's got to be out there scouting and going, well, how many people you seeing? Well, it looks about 400,000. They're going to do the numbers real quick, right? And now they begin to gather their 26,000 in verse 15. They get 700 for Gibeon. And then among them, we see there's 700 chosen men. They're left-handed and they're just really good with slinging stones. Okay, I get it, but that's how many? As opposed to how many? The numbers are just against you. So the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, numbered 400,000. They drew the sword. All these were men of war. They asked of God. They asked counsel. Went up to Bethel, asked counsel of God. Begin to note who will go up first. And Jehovah answers, Judah. First part of the battle, children of Israel rose up in the morning. They go out to battle against the Benjaminites, against Benjamin, the children of Benjamin. How's that turn out? They lose 22,000 of their own men. And verse 22 says, on the heels of losing 22,000 of their own people, what did they do? It says that the people of men of Israel encouraged themselves. Now we got to pause for a second. As best I can tell, they asked counsel of God. God gave them counsel to some degree. Judah goes first. They're to go up against the children of Benjamin. First time they go up against the children of Benjamin, 22,000 they lose. I didn't read about any Benjamites dying. Based upon what happened, they encouraged each other. There will be times when we are going to do and go and perform duties that are right, that may even have God's blessing. You think about sharing the gospel, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to suffer defeat. And when that happens, you know what you need? That's exactly right. Sometimes, if it's just those two of you, and one of them tried, the husband tried or the wife tried, and they share that with the other one, and it just didn't go well, and you can tell there's discouragement, then you have that companion who then says, what? It's okay. I'm really proud of you for doing what you did. Next time, maybe they'll listen. As opposed to when we meet these various obstacles and we're down, we sure don't need someone else basically to push us even further. Is that not right? That's exactly right. We all need encouragement from time to time because we have an adversary who discourages us all too often. Well, they encourage themselves. They set the battle in array. They go back to God. Shall we go up? Verse 23, Jehovah says, go up against them. They go up against them. How's it turn out the second time? 18,000. Now they're down 40. 40,000. A tenth. If you're talking about momentum here, who has it? The underdog, right? I mean, it happens in football all the time. We're not going to get into the specifics there, but it happens. The team that's not supposed to win got a bunch of injuries. They just get the momentum, right? All of a sudden, the team should be winning, got all the stars, not turning out too well. It's not going so good. Well, the people of Israel, verse 26, now what do they do based upon what's happened? Well, it says that they wept, they fasted, they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Who do they continue to go back to? Even though things aren't going their way, who are they seemingly continuing to trust in? Seemingly, that's the case. So they ask of Jehovah in verse 27, and then you have noted, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, he's the grandson of who? So there's that timestamp. There's that part that kind of helps us take these books and move them back, right? Because Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, would be really old if he's living after Samson, right? So it helps us. Shall I yet go again to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? And Jehovah said, go up. And there's something different about this here as opposed to the two previous answers. And what do you see? He says, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver him into thy hand. I do not know why in the two previous battles you've lost 22,018. I don't know that. I don't know what the mindset of the people were, if they really truly weren't trusting in God, or if they thinking, hey, we got 400,000, but hang on a second, let's go ahead and ask God, because that's really what we need to do first here. But we got 400,000. They only got 26,000, a few guys that are left-handed, no big deal. I don't know. But it does seem as though their hearts, as far as finally that last time weeping and fasting and offering, there's a progression here where all of a sudden it's going, you know what? We really need God's help here. Yes, Alex.
There is a little bit of a difference in how it leads up to the prayer in each of these. In the previous two times, it just said the sons of Israel came and wept and prayed, versus in this time it says all the people of Israel. So you have this idea that before it wasn't everyone, but now everyone is involved in this.
That very well could be. They definitely, it definitely seems to be a progression. And if we see God's response here, obviously there's something about this response here as it related to their previous times where they've inquired. I will deliver him into your hand. And so you have this strategy here, beginning in verse 29. This isn't the first time you'll see this particular strategy involved. We're going to send some people like we have the previous day, but we're going to have liars in wait. They're going to be hiding. And as soon as we draw everybody out of the city, then those liars in wait that are in hiding are going to occupy the city. They're going to set it on fire. When the people the children of Benjamin turn around and they see their city on fire, they're going to know, oh no, things are not going good. And then we're going to have them in essence surrounded. And that's exactly what you read about beginning in verse 29 down through the end of the chapter. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness unto the rock of Rimmon. And they abode in that rock 4 months. And as best I can tell, as it relates to the tribe of Benjamin, based upon what is said in verse 48, these 600 men are all that remains. And the men of Israel turned again unto the children of Benjamin and smote them with the edge of the sword, them with the edge of the sword. You're going to know that also included both women and children, based upon what you read in the next chapter. Not only did they slay both women and children, but all the animals. Remember, cattle is just a generic word. Cattle doesn't mean like our cow only. That would be, again, donkeys, all type, sheep, everything. And all that they found. Moreover, all the cities which they found, they set on fire. So at this point in time, 600 men. But Benjamin is not destroyed. But there is a problem. There's no way that the tribe of Benjamin will survive because there are no women left. Any comments on 19 or 20 before we close it out in chapter 21? In regard to how they fix the problem, every man doing what was right in their own eyes. I don't see anybody seeking any, okay, well, how do we fix this? This is how we fix this. They put their 2 cents together and say, okay, let's do this and let's do that. They came to Bethel. They sat there till evening before God. They lift up their voices. They wept sore. The response here is sort of mind-boggling for me in regard to now how it's unfolded. And they said, "O Jehovah, the God of Israel, why has this come to pass?" I mean, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel. It came to pass on the morrow that the people rose up early, built an altar. Again, you begin to see now this effort made, this remorse, maybe even the word regret. And the question is asked in verse 5, who is there among all the tribes of Israel that came not up? Because they'd already said, none of us can give any of our daughters to the children of Benjamin. There's an oath that he's taken at Mizpah. And notice verse 6 says the children of Israel, the American Standard says repented. What does your version say? Grieved, had compassion. There's a couple other times you'll see that similar phrase. Genesis 6, The American Standard uses the word repented. It repented God that he had made man. That's not like we would use the word repentance. And also Judas, when he betrayed the Lord, the word repented, and the idea there is regretted. It grieved them. Again, even though they had done what seemingly they had to do to some extent. Again, maybe at some point they begin to realize maybe we shouldn't have been so harsh as it relates to the entirety of Benjamin, all the children of Benjamin. But again, the dilemma is, how shall we do for wives for them that remain? Because there's no women, and we can't give them any of our daughters to wives. So they asked this question, who didn't come up? They said, well, nobody came up from the camp of Jabesh Gilead. So what do they decide to do? Well, they're just doing what's right in their own eyes. They sent 12,000 men. You go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, women and little ones. And who do they bring? Who are they told to bring? Virgins. How many do they find? 400. That's almost enough. How many men are left of Benjamin? 600. 13, the whole congregation sent and spake to the children of Benjamin that were in the rock of Rimmon. So now you see this effort made to repair the relationship. Benjamin feels good enough that these 600 men returned at that time, verse 14, and they gave them the women that they had saved alive. I just think about the comment you made, Sister Margaret, regarding these women. Can you imagine what it must have been like for them? Because all these have lost a father and a mother and maybe brothers and sisters, and now they're being taken and they're being given to one of the men of Benjamin. Why? Because everybody's doing that which is right in their own eyes. You're probably going to remember that part from the book of Judges, aren't you? So I wish you'd quit saying it. Well, that's what it says. The people repented them for Benjamin. They regretted it. They grieved because Jehovah had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Well, the elders of the congregation said, well, what are we going to do about the other 200? We got still 200 men that don't have a wife. Well, they say there's another thing. There's this feast in verse 19 of Jehovah, which year to year is in Shiloh. I said, okay. The command of the children of Benjamin saying, you go and you lie in wait in the vineyards. And behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then you come ye out of the vineyards. You catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and you go into the land of Benjamin. It shall be when their fathers or their brethren come and say, hey, you know what these guys did? We will say, listen, grant them graciously unto us, because we took not each man of them his wife in battle. We didn't save enough women for them when we did what we did, which could have been part of what grieved them. The problem that existed in regard to how we're going to let this tribe again continue. Neither did ye, see, they got themselves out of that problem. It's not like you gave unto them and therefore broke that oath that was made at Mizpah. If you did, you'd be guilty. And the children of Benjamin did so, took them wives according to their number, of them that danced, of whom they carried off. Can't imagine. They went and returned unto their own inheritance, and they built the cities, and they dwelt in them. And the children of Israel departed thence at that time, every man to his tribe, to his family, and they went out from thence, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that was right in his own sight. The Benjaminites are preserved, and the next time we will hear regarding the tribe of Benjamin, you will be being introduced to the first king of Israel, Saul. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. I really enjoyed teaching the book of Judges and studying this book with you. Remind me if we study it again somewhere in the near future that, as I said before, let's take these books, move them back. Maybe even we'll do Ruth and move her back especially when things are going really bad, and the judges will just bring out Ruth and show how that godly woman just really gives us something to smile about. Yes.
Just want to bring up one last thought from chapter 20 and their battle. There's a lot of parallels that you can find there to the conquest. It's almost as if what you're seeing here is an anti-conquest, if you will. Instead of Israel going to destroy a sinful nation who God told them to destroy, instead they see part of their own people doing something wrong, and they choose to go and slaughter them the same way. Here you have this anti-conquest because they're going and they're killing them. They're not giving them a chance to surrender or anything. Even when they try to flee, they just keep killing. It's almost as if they think that since they've done this wrong, then they must be killed the way that they had to kill people in conquest.
It's very, very possible.
Again, in reading that, in thinking about how that they went to them initially and gave them the opportunity to hand over the guilty party, that seems to be the fair thing to do. And when they wouldn't do that and they ask of God, and in all those three occasions, even though it seemed to escalate, God in essence said, go. And once it started, why it didn't stop at some point, why they didn't think about preserving women of Benjamin, I do not know. Maybe just once it started, it was just such a mentality that they just slaughtered until it was just a done deal. I'm not sure. I'll go back and say one more thing. The reason these events unfolded the way they did was because every man did that which was right in their own eyes. Thank you for your attention.